got out of prison to be like.
That was Suge Knight warning the world how dangerous prison life can be. And now, it's like he predicted his own fate. The Death Row Records founder was stabbed in a brutal prison attack, and sources say it might be tied to the dangerous secrets he's been exposing. So what exactly was Suge trying to reveal, and who wanted to silence him for good? Let's break it down. The attack that shook hip-hop. Suge Knight isn't just another name in hip-hop. He's one of the most feared and controversial figures the culture has ever seen. But on a quiet night in June, all of that power meant nothing. In the blink of an eye, Suge became just another inmate. Here's what went down. The lights in C Block had already been cut for the night when, for reasons no one could explain, another inmate somehow gained access to Suge's cell. What happened next was a vicious ambush, a violent attack that left the former Death Row boss bleeding out on the concrete floor. To understand why this happened, you've got to understand who Suge Knight really was. He wasn't some small-time hustler who stumbled into fame. Suge was hip-hop's boogeyman, a man whose name carried weight from boardrooms to back alleys. The rise of hip-hop's most feared boss. Born and raised in Compton, Suge started out as a promising football player before shifting to the streets, working as muscle for hire around LA. But it was the early 90s that cemented his legacy. After linking up with Dr. Dre, fresh off his split from Eazy-E's Ruthless Records, Suge co-founded Death Row Records, a label that would change the face of West Coast rap forever. By 1994, Death Row was pulling in over $100 million a year, with a roster stacked with legends: Tupac, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Nate Dogg, the Dog Pound. But behind the Platinum Records was pure chaos. Insiders say Suge ruled through fear and intimidation. Stories of beatdowns, threats, and even the infamous incident where he allegedly dangled Vanilla Ice over a hotel balcony became part of his myth. He'd roll up to clubs deep with 15 to 20 guys, shutting down scenes and making examples out of anyone who crossed him.
I'm quite sure somebody taught him that, and that's more deep in the industry. These guys who got involved with a lot of people who they mentors, instead of having guys that mentor your own father, they just had these guys they mentor. And when that happens in the industry, it was done to them, they do to the next person. So,
according to Suge, Diddy didn't just pick up those habits on his own. He claimed powerful men in the industry groomed and mentored Diddy, shaping him into the mogul he would later become. And now, as a mentor himself, Diddy has allegedly turned into the same kind of figure who once pulled his strings. But Suge didn't stop there. Moments later, he turned his sights on one of the most powerful men in entertainment history, dropping a bombshell that had the entire industry on edge.
Number one was Clyde Davis. And you gotta understand one thing. If Death Row, when I started Death Row, you gotta remember one thing. I didn't have no co-founder, nobody else. I started that company on my own and grabbed Dr. Dre.
If you know anything about industry politics, you know one name isn't thrown around lightly: Clive Davis. One of the most powerful music execs in American history, Clive Davis has launched superstar careers, buried scandals, and, according to Suge, decided who rises and who gets sacrificed in the game. And if you thought Suge was done with his explosive honesty, think again. Less than an hour later, he doubled down, accusing hip-hop's elite of conspiring to silence anyone who refuses to play by their rules. Even more shocking, Suge claimed that Diddy himself might be in danger, not because of what he's done, but because of what he knows.
He's definitely gonna be the black man that holds the bag. Because you gotta realize one thing: that boy's life is dangerous. His life isn't, and he's just not dangerous with the they said he's doing, but he's in danger. He knows too much.
That wasn't just some washed-up OG running his mouth. That was a man who knew the secrets, because for years, he was one of the ones helping to keep them buried.
He probably having a conversation right now with the higher-ups and everybody else to figure out how it's going to work itself out, because he know all the secrets. And if he gets to run his mouth, it could be a bad luck.
Suge might have been talking about Diddy, but what he didn't realize was that running his own mouth could end up getting him silenced, too. And then, it happened. It was just past 10:40 p.m. inside C Block Unit 5 at R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison tucked on the outskirts of San Diego. The yard was locked down. Lights dimmed. The usual end-of-night shuffle, inmates tucking away contraband, guards doing rounds, cell doors clanging shut in sequence. But this night, something felt off. According to a leaked statement from an anonymous corrections officer quoted by Hip Hop Unfiltered, one cell door stayed open longer than it should have. That door belonged to inmate number D395, Marion Suge Knight. That door shouldn't have been open for more than 30 seconds. Instead, it stayed unlocked for 2.5 minutes. And in a place like Donovan, that doesn't happen by accident. In that tiny window of time, an unidentified inmate, face covered, gloved hands, slipped inside. Witnesses in nearby cells later told Vlad TV. We heard a thud, then another. Then you could tell somebody got hit bad, cause all you heard after was the breathing. No yelling, just that sound you make when your ribs crack. Another witness claimed Suge's lifeline, the prison phone, was shut down for maintenance on C-block minutes after the attack. And then, silence. The assailant melted back into the shadows. The cameras? Supposedly working, but all they showed on playback was static between 10:38 and 10:46 p.m. A corrections insider later told Hip Hop DX. They didn't want this getting out. Bad for business. Bad for the feds. Bad for everyone. By the time it was over, the king of death row lay bloodied on his cell floor, ribs shattered, face cut, struggling to breathe. Within the hour, Suge was rushed to the medical unit. 3 known death row affiliates inside Donovan were either transferred to other prisons or thrown in solitary. The C-block security log for that night? Wiped clean. Phone calls to 2 outside numbers were logged and then manually deleted before sunrise. Somebody pulled rank, an insider told Vlad TV. That's why none of this hit the news cycle. They had 2 teams, one to hit, one to clean up. But the streets? The streets found out fast. By dawn, word was spreading across West Coast yards from Pelican Bay to Lancaster. The big homie got touched. And just like that, the game changed. By now, it's no secret Suge Knight made more enemies than allies on his climb to power. But what most people don't realize is how long some of those grudges have been stewing, and who still holds them today. Diddy, Clive Davis, Jimmy Iovine, former death row enforcers turned confidential informants. Every one of them had a reason to fear what Suge might still know, and what he was willing to say, especially after that explosive PBD podcast call.
Even when you speak on Snoop, people can say, well, are you picking on Snoop? Absolutely not. Snoop is picking on Snoop. Everybody say, Snoop, you had involvement in it. We're not trying to put you in prison. I don't want you to go to prison. Can't nobody put you in prison. You connected to those folks. And you Trump's little bitch. But why you just don't set the record straight?
Suge wasn't just airing old grievances. He was threatening to expose just how deep the rabbit hole goes, from the music industry's ties to criminal networks, federal handlers, and even money laundering schemes. According to a longtime West Coast insider who spoke anonymously to Hip Hop DX, Suge ain't been relevant musically in years, but info-wise? He's still sitting on murder cases, contracts, and dirty money moves going all the way back to the Pac and Biggie days. And now? He's way too reckless to keep quiet. After that broadcast, one thing was clear: nobody could afford to let Suge keep talking. Within hours of the attack, gang politics inside Donovan shifted. OG Bloodsets, long loyal to death row, fell silent. A top-tier shot caller from another yard unit was transferred overnight with no explanation. By the week's end, the name Suge Knight wasn't even whispered in Donovan. A code had been enforced. One inmate summed it up perfectly. When the bosses move in silence, you don't speak on it. And this was one of them moves. It'd be easy to chalk all this up to prison politics or some old beef finally catching up. But once you connect the dots, from that phone call, to the attack, to the sudden cover-up and media blackout, the pattern is impossible to ignore. This wasn't random. Suge stirred the pot too much, and the industry took notice. Because that podcast? It wasn't the first time Suge had been running his mouth. For months, the Death Row founder had been dropping bombshells, exposing names, airing secrets, and threatening to bring down some of hip-hop's biggest players. Studio microphone Suge Knight exposes hip-hop's biggest frauds. From a prison cell, Suge Knight has been sending shockwaves through the culture. Through his podcast Collect Call with Suge Knight, launched in October 2023, this OG started systematically exposing what he claims are the real stories behind hip-hop's most legendary figures. He painted a picture of betrayal, deception, and snake behavior that reaches all the way to the top of the music industry food chain. Some of his most explosive revelations targeted his former Death Row family, especially Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Two artists Suge helped elevate from street-level rappers to global icons dripping in money and fame. But according to Suge, their success came at a heavy cost: loyalty, truth, and ultimately the destruction of everything he built from the ground up. And no beef runs deeper or more dangerous than his war with Snoop Dogg. This one goes far beyond industry politics. We're talking loyalty, snitching, and the murky truths behind some of hip-hop's darkest chapters.
What you did is the weirdest bit I ever met in my life. Naturally, I'm in jail. Naturally, I'm in prison. So when the corporation of the name Death Row then didn't pay the fees to keep it going, you went and got the name and asked your boss.
You can hear it in Suge's voice. The frustration runs deep. He's not just accusing Snoop of twisting their shared history. He's straight up hinting that Snoop's been working with law enforcement and that he's got powerful connections protecting him from the same consequences that crushed everybody else in their circle. When Suge dropped the phrase "you connected to those folks," it wasn't just a throwaway line. In street code, that carries heavy implications, suggesting that Snoop's freedom and success might have come at the cost of keeping it 100 with the crew that built him. And the sense of betrayal? You can feel it when Suge talks about how Snoop and others have rewritten the history of Death Row Records, minimizing Suge's role and inflating their own contributions. In Suge's world, that isn't just disrespect, it's the ultimate violation.
True story. Dre came to me because I'm not gonna go into the situation what they was on about. It's sweat. I said, well, something like that. It's like old Hollywood. You gotta get married quickly. He wanted to marry this person, that person didn't want to. I can get this new person to marry again. One day, Dre came to me and said, I'm never gonna cuss on albums again. I'm never gonna talk about women again. And he told me that he wanted to be white.
Suge's revelations about Dr. Dre were just as explosive and way more personal. This wasn't just some industry beef. This was about betrayal between two men who once came together to create some of hip-hop's most iconic tracks. But over time, that partnership deteriorated into something far darker and more complex, a web of power struggles, backdoor deals, and what Suge claims were moves made to cut him out of the legacy they built together. For Suge, it wasn't just business. It was personal.
So when Eric finally get there, the guard calls up. He said, easy up here for Dre. Set him up. And easy after guard. You know what's up there? He said, that's Dre. So he walks in the studio, he see me, he see a few people. We start talking. I said, man, he ain't coming, but I'm gonna talk to you about him. I showed him the pictures of all the artists I had on one piece and the three I had on another piece. I was like,
these revelations painted a picture of Dr. Dre as a man battling his own identity and sexuality, someone who once turned to Suge Knight for guidance during a deeply personal crisis. Now, Suge airing out those intimate details shows just how far their relationship has fallen. It's either the result of a complete breakdown of trust between two former allies or a calculated strike designed to shatter Dre's reputation. Either way, this goes far beyond a business dispute. This is betrayal on the most personal level imaginable.
I see one of the saddest things I've ever seen in the name. I'm looking at Easy, Eric, like, he said, I thought it hard. You know, this form is going to need and be nothing. And it's like he's trying to hold back the tears because he don't want to be embarrassed by me seeing him crying. Because either he crying because he's scared or he crying because he hurt. But for another man...
In Suge Knight's version of events, Eazy-E was being played, manipulated by Dr. Dre, who was allegedly working in the shadows to destroy his former partner while pretending to stay loyal. To Suge, this wasn't just business. It was a cold-blooded betrayal that cut deep. The emotional toll on Eazy-E? According to Suge, it was devastating, a move that not only broke their friendship but also changed the course of hip-hop history forever.
And Andre answered the phone. I'm talking to him. I said, "You ready to come up here now? What you want done again?" He was like, "Man, shoot that head, blow his head off, shoot him in the eye, take pictures of it. You don't got one of those things, you know, blah, 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 mm-hmm. For a phone shit, you know. Get one of those portable cameras and let me see it. I want to see it, you know, blah, blah, blah."
But the darkest part of Suge's Eazy-E story came next. According to Knight, Dr. Dre wasn't just plotting business moves, he was allegedly planning violence against his former partner. If true, this wasn't just betrayal. This was a deadly power play that blurred the lines between music, money, and murder.
You know how crushed my mother would have been if I would have died? I could have. So when you get people who was not there, didn't know us, and say, "I grabbed Tupac and used to chill," or "this happened," how do you know these details, whoever you are, if you was not there?
Yo, this explosive claim from Suge suggests that Dr. Dre was allegedly plotting to have Eazy-E murked, with Suge even hinting at photographic evidence to back it up. If true, it would completely rewrite what we thought we knew about the inner dynamics of NWA, and even cast a new light on the circumstances around Eazy-E's death from age-related complications. To Suge, the current state of hip-hop is proof that corrupted systems triumphed over the raw street culture he once helped bring into the mainstream. His ongoing beefs with names like Wack 100 and Reggie Wright Jr. still pop up all over social media, showing that Suge's enemies aren't just major celebs. They include former associates and industry figures he says betrayed him or twisted their roles in Death Row's rise. The impact of these claims? If even a fraction of what Suge is saying is true, then some of hip-hop's most celebrated legends built their empires on lies, betrayal, and backdoor deals that directly contradict the realness they sold to the world. For fans, Suge's podcast is either a necessary expose of past sins, or a desperate man's last-ditch campaign to stay relevant. But here's the thing. For all the shots Suge's fired, from Dre to Diddy, Clive Davis to Snoop, there's still one story so deadly, so explosive, that even whispering about it could get a man touched. And it's not about royalties, contracts, or record labels. It's about what really happened that night in Vegas, when Tupac Shakur was gunned down in Suge Knight's car. Of all the street wars, industry betrayals, and jaw-dropping allegations swirling around Suge Knight, nothing carries more weight or more danger than the questions about his role in Tupac's murder. The official story is already street legend. Tupac and Suge were leaving the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand when a Cadillac pulled up and let off shots. Pac died 6 days later. Suge survived with only minor wounds. But Suge's own statements over the years, full of contradictions and half-truths, have kept decades of conspiracy theories alive and fueled suspicions that could still get him silenced, either by the streets or by people in power who want that chapter buried forever.
Rapper. Eventually it cost him his life. Eventually you'll have guys who will speak about Tupac who never met him. They'll say they were Death Row, never was there. Or they might have been security for Death Row, or the car wash from Death Row. They never met Pac, and they would say they want negative things about Tupac. They'll tell Tupac's story.
Listen to how defensive Suge gets whenever Tupac's death comes up. You can hear it in his tone, the raw emotion, the edge in his voice. It's a subject that cuts deep. It shows just how sensitive this topic still is for him, and how fully aware he is of the whispers, the people who've been saying for years that maybe, just maybe, Suge played a role in the murder of one of hip-hop's greatest icons. His challenge to the critics: how do you know those details if you weren't there? Hits two ways. Collision on one side, it feels like genuine frustration at the endless speculation. Collision, but on the other, it sounds like a calculated move to deflect attention, to steer people away from uncomfortable truths he might still be holding onto. The complexity of Suge and Tupac's relationship can't be overstated. On one hand, Suge was the man who bailed Pac out of prison, signing him to death row and giving him the platform to create some of his most iconic music. But on the other hand, their bond was built on mutual dependence, power plays, and the chaos of street politics, a volatile mix that may have ultimately proved fatal for Tupac.
Well, you talked about an incident with Suge and Mob James' late brother, Buntry.
Yeah.
They got into a fight, I guess, at Bar 1?
Yeah,
in Hollywood?
Yeah.
Were you there?
Yeah.
What happened?
I was on the other side of the room, but that boy Bruce Richardson beat their ass. You know what I'm saying?
I guess he knew karate.
Yeah. Man, he beat both of their ass.
Knight's frustration with outsiders claiming to know the truth about Tupac without ever having stood in the man's presence reveals something deeper. Beneath all the bravado, you can hear a certain protectiveness in Suge's voice, a desire to guard Pac's memory from speculation and outsiders who will never really understand what went down. But the facts leading up to Tupac's death are hard to ignore, and they don't paint Suge in the best light. Earlier that evening, in the MGM Grand's casino lobby, Suge and Tupac were caught on security cameras assaulting Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a known Southside Crip. That moment, two men beating down a rival in front of countless witnesses set off a chain reaction that would end in gunfire on Las Vegas streets just hours later. And here's where Suge's position gets real shaky. Investigators and former insiders suggest that the shooting wasn't just some random gang retaliation. Former LAPD Detective Greg Kading's investigation lays out a more chilling theory, one involving financial pressures, internal death row politics, and orchestrated betrayal. The insurance angle is particularly damning. Moneybag at the time, death row was bleeding money, and Pac was growing increasingly difficult to control. For a man like Suge, facing lawsuits, federal heat, and a crumbling empire, Pac's death could have killed two birds with one stone, removing a rebellious star and unlocking a massive insurance payout. Today, Suge's crumbling financial situation only fuels those suspicions. In March 2025, he made a desperate attempt to overturn his 28-year prison sentence, but the judge shut it down cold. It's a move that suggests money has always been at the center of his decision-making, even if it meant blood on the streets. But perhaps the most damaging blows to Suge's claims of innocence come from someone who knew the streets as well as he did, Keith D. The former Crip and key witness in Tupac's murder case gave detailed accounts of that night that painted Suge not as a victim, but as a man who might have been pulling strings from the shadows. Keith D's insights into Suge's character and methods provide a window into the cutthroat, dangerous world surrounding death row records, a world where loyalty was fragile and power was everything.
You left Malik for dead. You left a security named Kenny for dead when he got shot in the back behind you. Because the fact that the real thing is so much money was paid out of my pocket and your participation.
Keith D's willingness to talk about Suge Knight in ways no one else dared, describing moments where Knight lost fights or looked vulnerable, completely shattered the image of invincibility Suge spent decades building. For a man who ruled death row records with fear, those stories hit harder than any punch. But it wasn't just the insults. Keith D's detailed knowledge of Suge's movements, his connections, and the inner workings of death row records made his testimony about Tupac's murder both credible and extremely dangerous for the former mogul. Over the years, the timing of new revelations about Pac's death always seemed to cut against Suge. Every interview, every leaked document, every confession from the streets added weight to theories about his involvement, whether he pulled the trigger himself, ordered the hit, or simply let it happen to protect his empire. And then there's the most damning fact of all. Oncoming automobile Suge Knight was sitting in the car the night Tupac was shot, and he walked away alive. For some, that's proof enough. Combine that with Suge's history of violence, his financial free fall at the time, and the power struggles within death row, and the circumstantial case starts to look less like a theory and more like a blueprint for betrayal. Knight's response? Classic Suge. He spent years attacking the credibility of his accusers, dismissing Keith D as a liar-chasing clout, and doubling down on his claims of innocence. But in the court of public opinion, and in the streets, those defenses aren't hitting like they used to.
Well, one, I could know what killed me, I just don't know. But the thing about this, it was a real sad day, not just for Biggie, but for his family, and for the culture of hip-hop. I think that destroyed hip-hop with those two muggers.
Knight's explosive claim that Snoop Dogg might know more about Tupac's death than he's ever admitted publicly adds another dangerous layer to an already twisted story. If true, it suggests Snoop isn't just a bystander to one of hip-hop's darkest nights, but potentially a keeper of secrets too heavy to ever be spoken out loud. Even more shocking are Suge's allegations that Snoop left security personnel for dead in critical moments, painting a picture of abandonment and betrayal that some argue could also reflect how Pac was treated in his final hours. But it doesn't stop there. The notorious B.I.G. connection brings the conspiracy full circle. For decades, theories have circulated that Suge Knight may have orchestrated Biggie's murder as a revenge hit for Tupac. Though he's never been charged, the whispers have never gone away. If Suge really had a hand in both murders, it wouldn't just make him one of the most feared figures in hip-hop, it would mark one of the most devastating chains of crimes in music history, silencing two of rap's most gifted and influential voices.
Yeah, man, tell your life, tell your story. It still will never be the same without Tupac and Biggie. And I'm gonna end it here because I knew Pac and Biggie loved each other. When I was in a hotel and me and Pac in a hotel and he talking to Biggie before Pac passed away, he wasn't mad at Biggie like, I hate this motherfucker. He was more hurt because he felt that Biggie had something to do with the shooting.
Knight's emotional reactions when pressed about Biggie's murder revealed just how much the weight of these accusations still haunt him. On one hand, he admits he might know who pulled the trigger. On the other, he refuses to speculate either because he genuinely doesn't know or because he's making a calculated decision to keep his mouth shut and protect himself, and maybe others too. Even decades later, the shadows of these murders loom large. Ongoing investigations and renewed public interest keep the pressure on Knight, even from behind bars. New witnesses keep surfacing, and advances in forensic technology threaten to dig up evidence that was out of reach back in the 90s. But here's the kicker, Knight's current situation makes him more vulnerable than ever. With a 28-year sentence hanging over his head, it's clear he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison, unless he gives up information that could lead to plea deals or sentence reductions. That creates a dangerous situation. On one side, law enforcement might pressure him to talk. On the other, he's now a high-value target for powerful people who can't afford for him to spill any more secrets. The question of what Suge Knight really knows about Tupac's death, and what he might still be willing to reveal, might be the most dangerous piece of this whole puzzle. If he was directly involved, admitting it could finally bring closure for Pac's family and fans. But it would also mean more criminal charges and likely seal his fate behind bars. And if he wasn't the mastermind but instead made reckless moves that contributed to Tupac's murder? Speaking on that now could destroy what's left of his reputation and legacy without buying him any legal favor. So now the question isn't just what does Suge Knight know? The real question is, how much longer can he stay alive to tell it? Because in a world where entire careers were built on cover-ups and bodies have dropped just to keep secrets buried, Suge's voice is still echoing from behind bars. Every phone call, every podcast, every name he dares to drop is a reminder that the game was never clean. And whether he's speaking facts, twisting stories, or playing a deadly chess game, one thing's for sure, Suge Knight still has the power to shake the entire industry. And that power? It might be the very thing that gets him silenced for good.